Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. I'm Sandra Pepera. I'm the Director for Gender, Women and Democracy at the National Democratic Institute. And it's my very great pleasure to welcome all of you here in the room in Kigali and I don't know why I'm looking this way, but everybody else who's on the screen and joining us virtually from around the world. This is a massive opportunity for us to really focus in on the nexus between girls' education and civic participation. And as NDI, we are thrilled to be working again with the Population Council. I want to acknowledge, as I always do, first and foremost, our translators who are going to help us communicate. For those of you online, please find the translation options. We have translation in French and Spanish on channels, channel 1 for English, channel 2 for French, and channel 3 for Spanish. So thank you to the translators who are going to help us connect. The first thing I want to do is introduce to you our keynote speaker, Stacey Abrams. Stacey is a member of NDI's board of directors, and before that, she has had a distinguished career already as a political and civil society leader, a New York Times best-selling author, and the writer of a series of empowering children's books. It was fascinating to me to hear her talking to our delegation last night over dinner and to describe her own construct of movements for the right to vote, movements to have your vote count, and the importance of a progressive and responsive governance through targeted and focused policy action. Stacey was a member of the Georgia House of Representatives and the first Black woman to run as a candidate for governor of a state, the state of Georgia, for a major political party. So without further ado, I would like to invite Stacey to kick off our discussions today, and over to you.
Good morning. I'm fairly certain that's true. It is an honor to be with you this morning and to be a member of the board of NDI. When I was asked to speak about the radical possibilities of girls' education, it was an easy decision. I am the product of the radical possibilities of girls' education. My mother and father are both originally from the state of Mississippi in the United States, a state that is known for its troubled past. My parents grew up during segregation in Mississippi. My mother and father met when they were in high school. My father likes to tease her that he was from the wrong side of the tracks, an American idiom for poverty, and she was from the wrong side of the tracks. My mother's family had tragedy after tragedy. Her parents got divorced. She was left with a father who was significantly older and who later died before she reached the age of 14. My mom was a fourth grader, though, when she realized that she couldn't afford to stay in school. In the state of Mississippi in the 1940s and 50s, if you attended a segregated school, technically education was free, but there was a cost. There was the cost of the bus, the cost of food when you went to school, the cost of clothing, the cost of school supplies, costs that her family simply could not afford. And because she lived in a community where education was not prized, my mother did as everyone in her family had always done, she dropped out. My mother was a fourth grade dropout. She started working for a woman who lived next door, a neighbor, who allowed her to, who hired her to clean up around the house and do some errands. Her two older sisters had dropped out of school already. She thought nothing of it. But this neighbor, Miss Gert, said to my mother, Carolyn Hall, you're too smart. I see radical possibilities, not quite the language she used, but she saw something in my mother. And week after week, she would encourage my mom to go back to school, but my mother refused. At first, it was that she couldn't afford to. But as Ms. Gert probed, my mother admitted that she was embarrassed, that she had fallen so far behind after so many weeks of not being in school, that the utility of returning seemed diminished. And with the wisdom of a child, she decided that her life was over. At the age of 8 or 9, my mother had put her future on hold. But this neighbor and the church she attended, folks saw her and saw possibility, and they encouraged her to go back. They helped her find the resources. And when she finally screwed her courage up, when she convinced herself that maybe it was worth it, despite the fact that, and I kid you not, her deepest worry was that she was going to be taller than the boys when she got back to school. Because she'd missed an entire school year, she was afraid that she would be held back a year, that she would be taller, that she would be ostracized, that the utility of returning had diminished even further. She screwed her courage up and took herself back to school. And as she entered the principal's office to sign up, having taken herself for registration, the principal pulled out a file, and in it was a note from her teacher from the last year she had attended school. And it said, if Carolyn Hall ever comes back, move her on to the next grade. She's smart enough. That act of kindness, that act of grace, that radical belief in her capacity changed the trajectory of my mother's life. Because a few years later, my mother graduated as valedictorian of her high school, the only person in her family to finish high school. My mother became the first member of her family to attend college. And from there, she got a master's degree in library science. And then because she believes that education is transformative, went on to get a second master's degree in divinity and became a United Methodist minister who served a poor community in Mississippi. In fact, she built a church to serve community, and it just so happened it was a big pink church on the side of a highway. I tell the story of my mother because my mother's story is my story. My mother's story changed my life. My mother's father was born 25 years after the end of slavery in the United States. And yet in a single generation, my mother transcended what her expectations were, and she produced not one, not two, but 6 children, of which I am one. I became the first Black woman in American history to stand for governor in the United States. Thank you. It matters because what my mother endured, what my mother secured, changed the future of our country. I don't know what I will one day achieve, but I know that my contributions have mattered. I know that because my mother and my father believed in civic engagement, I believe in fighting for democracy. I know that because my parents fought for an education that was too often denied them, I believe in education and stand for offices to improve access. But I also know that because someone saw the whole of my mother, not just the poverty, not just the health issues, but saw the whole opportunity in that girl child, my mother saw the transformation of a society. You see, my younger sister, Leslie, is the first Black woman to be a federal judge in the state of Georgia. My older sister, Andrea, is the vice president of a college. My youngest sister, Janine, is the president of an organization that counts those who get undercounted and left behind. And I've got 2 brothers who are interesting too. But what you are here to think about is how do we invest in the whole girl child? There is a strong belief that healthcare is the fundamental implementation strategy, and it is important. But yesterday I had the extraordinary opportunity of listening to Condoleezza from Cameroon and listening to Kalpa from Nepal and hearing them exhort a group of women twice their age, 3 times their age, and tell us that they needed more, that they need us to believe in them, to see them, and to trust them. And so I will close out my conversation with these 3 exhortations. The first is belief. Either we believe in our mission or we don't. But you cannot say you believe in the future of young women and the future of girls if you do not believe in investing in their promise. And that means believing that you have to invest in not only their outcome, but their input. We must believe that their voices matter not after they've crossed the age of consent, but as they are developing into who they will be. My mother was 8 years old when someone saw what she was capable of, and they believed that giving her the resources mattered. Often in the funding space, there is a tendency to be fearful of mistakes. But rather than being fearful of mistakes, we should be ferocious about our mission. Because if the mission is transformation, we must believe in the young women who are the implementation method, and they are emblematic of what that mission looks like. We must believe that our investment in their futures is transformational for all of us. But our second responsibility is investment in their power. It is not enough to simply say we are going to help you. We must invest in all that makes them powerful, whether it is helping them grapple with sexual violence, addressing the complicated nature of understanding how their bodies operate, making certain that they have the skills to move in the society with the math and literacy skills that transform their opportunities. We must invest in their power. And so if you have a monolithic strategy, you are not addressing the needs of the whole child. And if you're already doing the right thing, bravo, tell your friends. But the last and most important thing is that we have to trust that what we do works. I am proof that education is transformation. Bell Hooks said that it was the most radical way that the classroom is a laboratory, and I'm mangling the quote. But Bell Hooks understood that the classroom is where so much happens, where we become more than who we are. In that classroom, my mother stopped being a statistic and became implementation of the future. Girls' education cannot be a secondary or tertiary thought. It is the place where transformation is possible. And there is no one who has proven that more than Malala. When we sat on a panel together yesterday, she reminded us that it was 10 years ago that she exhorted a world to stand up for girls' education, and yet we have fallen behind. We have seen increased investment in some of the ancillary components, but if you want to deliver healthcare to a girl, go to a school, make sure she is there week after week. If you want to make certain that our investments can diminish over time because we have seen better outcomes over time, invest in the classroom. Make her powerful where she is so she can become what she must be. We have to trust that our mission and our investment can change the world. That is the most radical thing we can do. I have been privileged to do many things and to meet many of you in other spaces, but I could not be prouder of the time I've been able to spend here in the last 2 days, because I see around me not simply a conversation about the nation I know, but about a world I believe can be. And so join me in creating the radical possibilities of education, of transformation, of civic engagement, and a better world for all. Thank you so much.
Well, what do you say, really? Wow. Thank you, Stacey. We couldn't be more proud of having her on our side. All of us. I think she has proven that she is a champion for us all and for the mission. She reminded us to be ferocious about it. Well, I love that word, be ferocious about the mission. To believe in the girls, to invest in their power, and to trust that what we do works. Really important messages. I'm now going to hand over to my dear friend and colleague, Thoai from the Population Council. And one of the things that Thoai said to me many years ago when we started on this road of developing our Disruptor module, he said, Sandra, do you know what the maximum age of what the age of a girl's maximum confidence is? And we all went, oh yeah, 25, 40, 60, no, 8 years old. And why I remind people of that almost weekly. And when Stacey was talking about her mother, that 8-year-old, that's exactly where we have to start thinking and investing. But let me get off this. Thoai, please come up and take over.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Thoai. I'm the Vice President of Research at Population Council, and thank you so much, Sandra, for the wonderful remarks, and to the NDI team at the NDI team and the Population Council team for organizing this wonderful event. Before I provide some framing to the conversation today, I want to say sorry that Minister Sengeh from Sierra Leone cannot join us this morning via in person or via Zoom, but he sent a video, so I want to introduce Minister David Sengeh. Minister Sengeh is the new Chief Minister of Sierra Leone. Congratulations, Minister Sengeh. Sierra Leone just had an election, so he can be with us today. He was the Minister of Basic and Senior Secondary Education and the first Chief Innovation Officer for Sierra Leone. He has been a shining light for girls' education and for technology transformation in sub-Saharan Africa, and particularly Sierra Leone. He's been instrumental in recent education reforms, including bringing pregnant girls back to school. He's been instrumental ensuring parity in enrollment in primary and secondary education for boys and girls. He is an author, and most of all, he also a singer and an artist. So if I can please have Minister video on the screen for the audience to join us. And I also want to welcome the 100-something plus audience for joining us online as well.
Greetings from Freetown, Sierra Leone. I'm very sad I couldn't make it to Kigali for this amazing gathering of people who are working together to think about the future of our countries, the future of our continents and the world, with women at the center of it. For us, the ministerial communique represents what all countries should be doing. It's about inclusion, having youth at the center, and ensuring that each one of us are able to invest in humans, in their education, in their health, and understand those linkages. And that's really what our government has been doing over the last 5 years, with a focus on human capital development, with education, health, and food security. But this is also important because you can't change policies without having an inclusive set of people around the table. And this is why in our cabinet, we now have about 9 people who are under 40, and ministers who are 32 years old, and several who are under 35, 36. And it's important for youth to not only benefit from education and the skills development, but they are given leadership opportunities at a very early age. Over the last year, we had what we call the Freetown Manifesto, which was about gender transformative education, gender transformative policies in and through education. And we had about 13 countries come to Freetown, where we discussed on ways in which we can have budgetary allocations that reflect our ambition. We were able to ensure that in our countries we make a commitment for comprehensive sexuality education as well, to really harness and interlink these things. And with our radical inclusion policy, we see that many more pregnant girls, many more kids with disabilities, many more people from poor backgrounds, many more adolescents and parent learners can come back to school and stay in school. I think what states need to do, and I can also speak to this as the new Chief Minister for Sierra Leone, is that we must put our monies where our mouth is. We must put our actions behind our intentions. So if we agree that we need to have youth at the table, we should give youth those portfolios of important ministries. Youth should be in parliament. If we agree that women should be considered and we should have women at the table, we should ensure by law that there is a minimum set of women who can be in cabinets, who can be in every appointed position, so that we can't always say, but where are the women, where are the women, until the way we change systems is by ensuring that you have no option but to find the women and to find good women, so you have no excuse. I think states have to ensure that they remove the excuse. It's too easy. And so enact things and make sure that those policies are followed through. Some additional things that I think states can do, and at the ministry level, which we did in basic education, for example, when I was there, was we passed a new law that said there can be a youth advisory group within the ministry's leadership, such that you're not going to change policies on young people without young people. I want to thank all other member states and everybody who's made this commitment. And at Women Deliver Conference here, we're not just meeting and discussing ideas without action. I believe that we'll all go back to continue the great work that we've done and that we can collaborate better, because at the end of the day, when youth, when women are not only in the room and at the table and can participate how they choose to be, we all win and the world prospers. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Minister Sengeh, for sending in the video. And I don't know who put me in this predicament to follow both Stacey and David, so I have to take it out with them later. But allow me to give a few minutes to provide some framing of our conversation today with our panelists. Stacey, your inspiring remarks remind me of my mother. And I just tweeted, I said, "You're crying, I'm not crying." And I am the story of my mother as well. She changed my life, and hopefully I can contribute to changing the world. And I thank you for your encouragement, for your reminder of us to be aggressive with our ambition. You've been saying that ferocious and aggressive with our investment, because education opportunities and investment in adolescent growth cannot wait. We cannot hesitate. And I love that. And David, thank you so much for your champion in inclusion of growth and those who are living in poverty. It is crucial that we achieve your vision of education opportunity for all, Stacey, and we welcome this continued leadership that you have. When we conceived this event, and you alluded to it, the quote from Bell Hooks, "The classroom remains the most radical space of possibility in the academy." We see this as a call to action to get creative with our solution for the education challenges. Among the most fundamental of those challenges is the need to achieve education equity so that all children are in school and learning regardless of race, gender, class, and other form of marginalizations. But right now, we are facing a major global education crisis. The numbers are shocking and heartbreaking. More than half, 56% of children are unable to meet minimum proficiency standards in reading and math, with far higher, about 90%, for girls in sub-Saharan Africa. An analysis from the Council EAGER program showed that only 1 out of 10 poor girls complete lower secondary school in 28 countries. That kind of gender inequality is a broad pattern. Poor young girls are less literate and poor young men in 78% of country in lower middle income country. And yes, I think we should celebrate what positive trends there are, such as progress made in school enrollment and completion, especially the achievement in parity in terms of primary and secondary school enrollment in many settings. I know Rwanda and Sierra Leone have done a fantastic job on this. However, girls and women are held back from entering the labor market and participating in leadership roles at all levels of society and of government. For example, the current global labor force participation rate for women is just under 47%. For men, it's 72%. That's a 25 percentage point difference. You can tell that I'm a researcher. And in many regions, women are facing larger gaps of up to and more than 50 percentage points. That means women are not holding critical leadership roles in areas that are essential to building community with vibrant civic life that Stacey described. And Stacey knows this number very well. The rates of political representation are even lower. Only 28 countries have female head of state. Only 26% of all national parliamentarians are women. And only 5 countries have gender equal parliaments where at least half of the seats are held by women. I'm happy to report that Rwanda is one of them. This is injustice. And those numbers raise a few critical questions that we're gonna explore today on the panel. What is happening to girls and young women when they complete secondary education? What barriers are preventing them from moving into position of leadership and power? How are we empower them so they can lead us in building a more vibrant society so that we all can benefit from when we face the intertwined and difficulties of the climate crisis, the negative impact from the pandemic, rising inequality? There's a couple other challenges that we need to tackle. We need to support students from building back from learning losses and the other type of losses during the pandemic. Stacey yesterday called for collective action, and today she called for collective action again to create radical possibility for girls. These mean we need to transform education system. So that's why we need a new social contract to transform education system today.
Le système scolaire aujourd'hui et pour la nuit. Et je crois que cela est possible parce que nos panélistes aujourd'hui ont démontré qu'elles ont pu faire ça dans leur travail. Donc, vous avez voté pour moi.
Our panelists, and then I will ask them some questions. First of all, I would like to welcome Stacey Abrams to the stage. Stacey, please join me. I know you are jet lag, but you can clap louder than that. Yeah. Second, I'd like to introduce Karla, the project coordinator of Nalabek, an indigenous woman-led grassroots organization in Guatemala that runs safe spaces group for adolescent girls in rural communities. Karla is a Mayan Kichet leader and an advanced student of environmental engineering. She founded Nalabek in 2015 alongside other young women from her community. The organization mission is to strengthen capability of catchy girls and adolescents, including sustainable livelihood opportunities through Casa Productiva initiative. Thank you, Karla. Welcome. And finally, my thanks and welcome to Torbjorn Pettersson, Assistant Director General and Head of Department for International Organization and Policy Support at the Swedish International Development Agency, or Sida. A development economist and political scientist by training, Pettersson has spent his professional career in politics, diplomacy, and development cooperation. He has served as the Swedish ambassador to Ethiopia and the African Union in Addis Ababa and to Afghanistan in Kabul, among other postings. Thank you and welcome to panelists. So our panelists today will speak both English and Spanish. So you have a headset on your table if you want to use them. And to our audience online, please tune into the right channel for the appropriate language of your choice. We have simultaneous translation in English, French, and Spanish. So I want to start today's conversation by asking Karla and then Torbjorn a simple question. How is your work foster education and civic engagement for adolescent and young people, and especially for girls? So Karla, you work a lot with indigenous community and indigenous girls. So I'd like to start with you first. Por favor. Yeah.
Buenos días a todas las personas que hablan español, si están en este espacio. Perdón. Bueno, yo escribí un poco de lo que voy a hablar porque a veces se me olvida, ¿verdad? Las cosas importantes. Entonces, desde que nosotras decidimos fundar Nalipac con las compañeras, queríamos que fuera una plataforma que facilitara el fortalecimiento de la autonomía de las niñas, las adolescentes y las jóvenes y pudieran desarrollar o trabajar en un plan de vida, pero no solo esto, sino que ellas pudieran cumplir con lo que ellas plasmaran en este plan de vida.
That in your plan, we saw education, so we are wondering how have we been able to achieve all this? And as an organization, it is very important to have a space where we can have conversations that most of the time we cannot talk about it in the family or in the schools. And this program has given the opportunity to be a platform where the women, the young girls, can come together to strengthen ourselves and then to also build our identity. From there, we realized that even though we have life plans, and then we have identities, and then we have a way of working, we realize that we have some barriers that are difficult to overcome. For instance, the bad quality of education, and we also have a lack of education coverage. And this is a scenario that is very difficult. We can also add the problematic like a lack of services. We don't have also clean drinkable water. And we are clear, for instance, on the aspect that, we have racism, and then we have a systematic segregation of women, indigenous women and indigenous girls. Well, I'm sorry. Well, we have learned that a fundamental part of our work is to be able to listen the problem that the women have, because we believe that the generations are changing, and what we need to do, what we lived, can be, for instance, changed right now. So we have to adapt to the programs to be able to solve the problems that they are having at this particular moment. And we have been able to adapt our programs to reduce the negative impact in their lives. For what we have done, we started to implement, opening programs, opportunities that help in the food security, and then there, and also on how they can be economically free. And also, we also have to tackle the system that actually discriminate us, and when we have some difficult problems. At the end, during the electoral program in the 2017-2019, we have realized a kind of partnership with those candidates, so that we can know their life plan and to be able to work with them. And this is still a challenge for us. Now we are trying to make a way that so that the adolescents people can know the political structure, and for instance our villages, so that they can be able to understand our context and get the right solutions. Thank you. Gracias, Karla. Torbjorn, ¿me escuchan?
I got a bit inspired there listening to Stacey. So I think I leave my notes on development effectiveness just for now to tell a story of mine from my professional life. As you mentioned, I worked in several countries. One of the countries where I served longest is Afghanistan. I had the luck, which seldom I think comes to us as diplomats and aid workers, to revisit something you work with. We live quite a nomadic life. So in the late 80s, during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, I worked with humanitarian support to Mujahideen, to freedom movement controlled areas in northern Afghanistan. Was humanitarian work, but we came to realize in my organization then, the Swedish Committee for Afghanistan, that we need to work more long term. So we started to work with girls' schools in Afghanistan in the late 80s. And I traveled around on horseback with the Mujahideen in those days, being very frightless and fearless humanitarian worker in those days, and negotiated with local school communities to start schools for girls. There were hardly any school for boys and definitely no one for girls. So we said that, okay, we support the school for boys if you also let the girls go to school. That was a quite brave strategic decision, and I could talk a lot about that. I won't do, but in any case, we were quite successful. And I specifically remembered one small village called Vasaj in the northeast corner of Afghanistan, where I worked with the commander then. We convinced them to start, which wasn't that difficult, I should say. The population were quite enthusiastic about it, to start girls' schools. And it went quite well. Then I left, did other things and so forth. And luckily, 19 years later, I had the opportunity to go back as a white-haired ambassador to the same village. And I thought they don't remember me and so forth. The first guy I met there was the head of the local school committee we had started, who was now headmaster of that school. And he was so eager to tell me the pride of the village were two girls that had now graduated from the University of Kabul, which we also supported. One as a doctor, one as an engineer, which is the best things you can be in Afghanistan. So, and the pride and the joy that the whole community had from this school, and the result was amazing. So when I dried off the tears on my cheeks, I was reflecting that one thing that is so obvious that we tend to forget it is that if you work with education, you have to be long term, because it's about, and when you, Stacey, mentioned the dropout, that's something we still struggle with. It's quite not, I shouldn't say easy, but in many countries I work, we are able to start the first level, grade 1 to 3 is normally okay, and then you get the dropout of girls specifically. COVID haven't made anything, have made things a lot worse in that sense. So it's still one of the top priorities. But I think that you asked the question, what do we do? And I'm now in charge of international programs and Assistant Director General of Sida. One thing that we try to honor, we are not that successful, and our politicians don't always make it that easy, if I can be a bit undiplomatic here, but you need to be long term. It takes 12 years to reach that degree in Kabul University, and there's no shortcuts to that. So you have to keep them, girls, in schools during Taliban rule, during Soviet occupation, during war of terror. They had made a tremendous effort. So I think my first take is you need to be long-term, and if you invest in education. The second is, and that's also a principle that we try to follow in everything we do on gender, and a bit of something that we have come to realize is more important when we have taken a more structured feminist approach, is to support the local organizations in their own right. Because remember, I was there as a representative of an organization 19 years back for a week or two, starting up, and then we did some curriculum development and what have you, the things that you can do. But the important thing is the pride of that local committee, which has kept that school going during all these phases that we all read about, and some of us have followed quite closely in Afghanistan. It is an amazing achievement. So I think that this long term would be my number one. Second is, you need to build local organizations and movements in their own right. That's, if you want to change norms on gender, and so it's about supporting local organizations. And we as an international community, donor community, don't have a very good track record on that. So that would be my first take. Thank you.
I think that's great. And Oh,
If I
yeah,
could,
please go ahead.
I just want to emphasize the importance not only of investing in local organizations, but being willing to let those local organizations make mistakes. Because often what prevents the investment is that there isn't proof that it will work. There isn't proof that the young person or the woman who has created this response knows what they're doing. But part of education is learning, and part of learning is making mistakes.
Yeah.
And I think there's an intrinsic desire to be successful, to be able to prove your return on investment immediately. But the angel investment that has to follow for local organizations is that you are investing in successful failures. I like to say I'm the best loser I have ever met. And it's because even when I am not successful in my endeavor, I am making progress. And I think sometimes for the funding community, for the political community, no one wants to risk reputation or risk consequence for doing the wrong thing. You can't do the wrong thing investing in a girl's education, because even the lowest return on investment is more than the consequence of lack of access. And so I think to echo his point, the ambassador's point, it's not just being willing to invest in local organizations, it's investing in those local organizations that can't prove that they're going to work. Mm-hmm. Because the incremental cost to trying is infinitesimal measured against the possibility of success, the possibility of having someone like Karla. And so I think I just want to echo this point and emphasize so much that we keep waiting for a perfect module, a perfect system, or a group that has proven that they can do it. But the people who need our investment so they can prove that it can work.
Yeah. I want to pick up on this point about long-term. In my work, I spend a lot of time talking to donors. I have the pleasure of working with Karla and her organization for the past decade to really kind of put resources into the hands of Indigenous women, grassroots locally led Indigenous women in collaboration with our organization. Stacey, your keynote about your mother is about intergenerational transformation of education. You talk about long-term ambassador, long-term investment. However, when I go to the donors, and there are many donors in the room today, they are not radical. They are scared of investment. They question, while Karla really need the investment. 50% of the population in Guatemala is indigenous. You didn't know that, did you? They continue to be excluded from social system. So how do we make a case to donor? Can we transform government? Not just donor, because government play a bigger and more important role in transforming their countries. How to make the case that girls are political actors, and we need to invest in them today, and we need to take risks. Why are business leaders taking risks? And in development, we don't take risks, and we don't put money into the hands of women and girls on the ground. So what would you say to the donors and to the government?
Well, since he stared at me, I'll start. Let's start with government. Having been a part of it, I apologize. Most people in government it's a job. You want to keep your job. And the best way to keep your job is not radical action. It's stasis. If you don't do something worse than people expect, they have no reason to get rid of you. And so we often find that the most sustained political leaders are there because they don't do much. They do just enough to maintain their position. But the transformational leaders are the ones who actually take risks. And there's no one more willing to take a risk than someone who didn't expect to be in that place. And that is women. And so part of the civic participation is understanding that it's not just who gets elected to office, it's who is running that campaign, who is advising, who is in the community. And so if we want to change government outcomes, government has to be concerned about the voters and the communities they serve. And when you bring in girls as actors, when you bring in women, when we invest in women's participation and girls' participation, what we're creating is an audience that has to be satisfied. Those who are considered, the person that a politician is most afraid of is the one who can find their office. If you can find where I am, you can demand what you need. And so part of investing in girls' education is that you're investing in their civic participation. They are more likely to show up. They are more likely to demand that you take action in return for their vote. And they are more likely then to eventually take office themselves because they get tired and frustrated with inaction. So that's the government side. On the donor side, there is a deep fear of, again, of making mistakes. And I'm going to keep saying it because fundamentally it is about being willing to risk not having a profile story because you didn't have a return on investment in a year or two. But it's also it's the same challenge the government has. The donor community benefits from not being too radical and not being too safe, doing exactly what they've done. It is so easy to just basically re-up the grant that you did the last time. It is much easier to re-up that grant than it is to go and seek out someone new who you don't know, because that's more paperwork. That's more challenge. But the transformation happens when we go beyond the stasis of mediocrity and we risk either incredible success or wild failure, but even wild failure teaches us something.
Thank you, Stacey. I want to pick up on this point about the feminist policy that Sida has. So Torbjorn, I'd love to hear your perspective on this. What does it mean to be a foreign, truly feminist foreign policy, especially with regarding to tackling girls' education and addressing the needs of adolescent girls? While we have seen increasing number of government implementing this, Canada is one of them. I think they might be in the room today. What is the mismatch between stated policy and actual resources? And I just want to put some data point out there. A survey of 13 feminist funders supporting girls reported a combined total of only 40 million in grant-making dollars in 2021, a measly sum compared to what is needed and what is spent elsewhere. And as of 2020, 4% of global bilateral aid went to programs with gender equality as a primary objective. Injustice. So could you talk to me, how does that translate in your work? And why would you encourage other donors and government to join forces with you in terms of feminist policy?
Thank you. Well, let me reflect on that just to say I'm a Swedish civil servant, and we did have a government that declared a feminist foreign policy some years ago. The present government elected last year are not using that anymore. Though I think one shouldn't read too much into that actually, because it's still, you know, there's a continuum of Sweden working with gender equality as a prime goal of our development cooperation. But the label is interesting. I was ambassador when this kind of shift or this labeling came about, and the first reflection I have is that what it meant, because you said, what does it really mean? To be honest, there's a lot of countries now who declare their foreign policy feminist, and it means a bit different things. I don't think I can give a complete answer to that question, but what is beyond the label, so to say, is of course the important thing. But the label as such was interesting, because if you say to a partner government, to partner organizations, to private sector partners or so, that you support equal rights for men and women, right? There's no controversy in that. Everyone agrees. And then if they do something or not, that's another matter. If you say you're feminist, you have a feminist policy. You mainly you can say the same things, but what you create is attention, and I think an awareness, because it's a much more controversial way of labeling what you are doing. and because it challenges someone. The patriarchal societies where you work are often challenged by that. It forces you to look at structure, it forces you to look at long-term change rather than say, you know, do we have 45, 55 or should we have 30, 70 in the statistics of men and women in some aspects. So I think that what we learned was to be more political, to visualize what's happening. So just to, I know we're out of time, so I won't go too long. No, that's one reflection. The other is something which I already spoken to, is that we realize that you need to support movements, local organizations in their own right. And again, echoing Stacey, including letting them make mistakes. And that makes that's quite a change or controversial in donor terms, because we donors have often seen local organizations as implementers of agreed programs, right? But I think that was the second most important take. I can come back to the figures if you want, but I won't take more time.
No, I want to interrupt you there because I think, Karla, I would love for you to comment on this. You are grassroots, you're on the ground, you are feminist, you're supporting indigenous community. What do you have to say to donors to make sure that they are actually bringing real solution to people on the ground and not just statements and policy and meetings? You know, what do you need, Karla? This is a question that Stacey asked the panelists yesterday. If you have possibility, what does an organization like yours need?
Gracias por la pregunta, y para nosotras es muy importante. ¿Por qué? Porque como organizaciones, sobre todo locales y de jóvenes, muchas veces empezamos a buscar un cambio en nuestras comunidades al ver las desigualdades que tenemos. Sin embargo, esto no significa que tengamos la capacidad para poder abordarlo de la mejor forma. Entonces, desde nosotras puedo hablar de nuestra experiencia, que hemos ido mejorando todo el trabajo que venimos haciendo con todo el aprendizaje que tenemos, implementando programas, pero también es muy importante tener aliados. En este caso, nuestro principal aliado hasta el momento, y que también lo fue desde el inicio, ha sido el Population Council. Entonces, ha sido como esta dinámica de les contamos cuáles son nuestras necesidades, qué proponemos, entonces ellos ven si es posible llevarlo a cabo, ¿verdad? Entonces, y también muchas veces nos refuerzan esta parte. Entonces, creo que los donantes tienen que adoptar como esta forma de te voy a pedir según tus capacidades, y también voy a reforzar las capacidades que también tienen ya instaladas. Entonces, nosotras como juventudes, sobre todo las mujeres, también tenemos como limitaciones, sobre todo si vivimos en contextos precarios, donde la educación no es tan buena. Entonces, muchas veces las jóvenes se gradúan, pero no tienen las habilidades o las capacidades ya instaladas para poder desempeñar un rol, un cargo de manera adecuada o eficiente, como todo mundo espera, ¿verdad? Entonces, esto también, si nosotras empezamos a hacer actividades buscando generar cambios, pero aparte de eso nos ha tocado que adaptarnos a procesos de los donantes. En este caso, muchas organizaciones juveniles terminamos registrándonos de manera legal, y esto trae también muchas responsabilidades de cumplir con el gobierno local. Y también se nos exige mucho tener documentos, ¿no? De manuales, de procedimientos, y al inicio esto a veces no existe, ¿verdad? Entonces, también creo yo que las organizaciones donantes, ya sean de gobiernos o también sean empresas privadas, creo que tienen que tener como diferentes estructuras para poder rendir cuentas, ¿no? Porque hay como también en el campo diferentes estructuras promoviendo cambios.
Karla, I wanna really push you a little bit. What do you want from donor? If the world was possible for you, what do you need? Simple as, you know.
En este momento, nosotras desde la organización hemos hecho como evaluaciones internas, ¿no? Y parte de lo que nosotras requerimos es fortalecer las capacidades de gestión que tenemos. Primero eso, creo yo, y también mejorar nuestras capacidades de planificación y también las de ejecución. Entonces, por momentos mantenemos esto, pero también las organizaciones dependemos mucho.
Many of our organizations, we are financially dependent. And so there are times when key people who are in the donor organizations, in our organizations rather, have to go. And a lot of times we find that people from our organizations have to look for what they can sustain their lives better. And so that we have to recognize that. We need to pay, we have to pay for the work that we do. We cannot reduce those costs. We can, even though we want to our work to benefit the community, but we do have we need funding to sustain our own personal lives. And in our case, as a PAC, we were started to look for ways through which we can be able to sustain ourselves, our organizations. That will enable us to be able to work in a sustainable manner, and so that we can also be able to make decisions in a more independent manner compared to what we're doing right now. And so we launched something called Casa Productiva. It's a center. Casa Productiva is a production center. Just like Stacey was saying a while ago, we've been trying to think about, we've been trying out a couple of things to see what would it work based on our context. And so in 2018, we started to have what you have raising birds and bees. We were we started to produce eggs and to sell them on a local level to sustain ourselves on this year up to from May 20, we started in May 2022. But we found out that we had the activities to produce, to get more funding, or rather to get more income, but it was not sustainable and we had to stop. And so you find when we started, we had several challenges. We had to now register that as a company, and we had to spend a lot of time and effort, but we did not have profit. And we found out that yes, it was an approach that we could use to generate income, but we still fell short. And so this year we opened up a factory to produce organic material and to be able to have agricultural inputs from this factory and these bioproducts. So in order for us to be able to also work against towards a reduction of chemically dangerous products harmful to the environment, and that also is an approach that we are following to be able to work towards protecting the environment. And so when we talk about needs, what do we need from donors? There's so many needs, but for right now, I would say that funding is what we really need the most. Muchísimas gracias. Pensando de
growth empowerment as well as education and addressing the climate crisis and migration pattern in Guatemala. I have Torbjorn have to depart very soon, but I want to pick up on this question about norms, and I'm going to direct it to you, Stacey, right? So I want to about norms and cultural conversation, and I really think about to truly foster gender equitable engagement in both education and civic life, we need to shift deeply entrenched patriarchal norms and recognize inherent values in girls' education and girls as political actors. And before you respond, I want to kind of know that your work stand out as a clear vision of that. You redefine the U.S. conversation on voting rights and create conditions for sustained and increased voter turnout. You want those accomplishments through multi-racial and multi-generational coalition of voting rights activists, include Black folks, brown folks, LGBTQI folks, young people, immigrants. So how do you suggest that we translate that into the sort of shifting norm for investing in girls in our international development community?
Thank you for the question. I think the minister, David from Sierra Leone, said it best. It's putting your money where your mouth is. Part of patriarchy is that we presume that the work for women and girls should be voluntary, or that we can pay the least amount necessary and expect the largest return on investment. As Karla pointed out, often women are expected to both change civil society and have a job and take care of family with the same financial capacity as a man who only has to do one of those things. And so the first responsibility, what we did in every organization I've ever launched, we pay people what they need, not what we want. Because when you invest in, if you believe in the mission, then you should invest in the mission as though the people delivering are worthy of that cost. And so the first piece, and I appreciate you pointing out, I think about the holistic approach. I meet people where they are, and the goal is to understand that the first impediment to service is the ability to afford to serve. And so that's the first norm. We have to stop thinking about this as voluntarism. This is a business. It is the business of survival. It is the business of civic participation. And that business for some begins when they are 8 years old. We should think about whether does it make sense to treat educating girls as a cost, basically pay them to go to school. We spend so much time thinking about the other side. How much does it cost to educate? Is there an investment strategy that says we will pay you to go to school? We will pay, because if you want to incentivize parents to keep children in school, especially girls in school, make certain there's a monetary benefit to it, because they are often the reason for pulling them out is directly tied to a financial or a structural cultural challenge. I think the next piece is to harness all of the communities of interest. We are talking about girls and women, but this is an indigenous conversation. This is a conversation driven by the need that there are religious connotations, the Taliban. There are conversations that are being had, and we cannot have a single source conversation. We have to think about all of the inputs. And one of the normative changes that has to be made is that we have to understand the whole girl, all of the pieces that challenge who she is and what she can become, not simply her biological sex, but what conditions does she face? What obstacles will she confront? And then what can we do to remove as many of those barriers as possible? And then I think the third one is that we have to, and I love Karla's story. She couldn't wait for funders to show up. So they created an entire factory. Entrepreneurship is a lovely word for I'm going to help you take care of yourself. And we have to think about entrepreneurship as a vertical within education. And it can start as young as 8 or 9 years old. Teaching young girls that not only do they need to learn, but they also have the ability to run things when they are that young. We wait, and often young women don't learn about entrepreneurship until after their third major challenge, when they're in their mid-30s. We have to start doing this when they are in school, because they have to believe, and if you want to challenge the patriarchy, create rich women.
Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, I'm all about creating rich women, and I hope rich women continue to invest in girls. So that's my call back to all the rich women out there. Ambassador Torbjorn have to leave quite soon. So I want to make sure to squeeze in a question before he has to leave. So I want to ask the audience, if you have a burning question, we'll go to 10:20. So there's a question right over there. Please introduce yourself, make it brief, and then we'll turn back to the panelists.
Hi, everyone. My name is Irene Ogeta from the Athena Network. This is a very exciting space for us, Athena, because we work towards advancing the leadership of young women and supporting education, and also as fundamental components in gender equality and HIV responses. So my question goes to almost all the panelists, but first allow me to be the devil's advocate. It will really have been great because we talk about inclusion of young women, inclusion of girls, and we are here to look for radical possibilities of keeping the girls in school. We should have at least had one girl represent the voices of other girls in that panel. With that said, we notice with so much concern that most of us, and also coming from almost all the panelists, there is one thing that stands out.
Please get to your question. We'll
The
love to
donor
get your question very soon.
Sorry, the donor expectation from the implementing organizations. So how do we ensure that the community we are serving and as organizations implementing in the community are actually not actually serving the donor's interest, but we are actually looking at serving the interest of the population that we work for? My last question is, how can we also integrate digital literacy in our current educational curriculum so that it's inclusive, equitable, accessible, and affordable for every person and every girl, to be precise? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I would turn the first question to you, Torbjorn, and then we can talk about inclusion.
Great, thank you very much, and thanks for the question. I think you have the point I pick up from what you say, which I think is so extremely important, is to change the way we look at accountability. And I agree that there has, of course, and it's in the nature of official development assistance in a way that you, as an implementing organization, an organization receiving support, is responsible to donors. So the accountability has been kind of donor attracted. I think for us, it's so important to get less of that attitude in the way we work. So the way we do it is we give core support, let the organization themselves decide.
Yes.
I think that's a very important step to take. And the second is, of course,
hello, grantee,
to demand the elaboration of accountability systems among our partners, not being accountable to us, but being in reality accountable to the people they serve, because there are good examples of that. There are unfortunately also bad examples of that. And I think part of that is the localization agenda, not to think that you from an international NGO can create local NGOs on your own. So there's a lot of challenges, not only for us as donors, but also for more traditional civil society, or say NGO partners, to change their behavior. So I think you're spot on that these are the things that we have to continue work with as a donor community.
Thank you, Torbjorn. Torbjorn is 10:16. If you have to step away, we'll continue without you. I apologize, but thank you so much. You've been fabulous.
I'm very sorry to have to leave, and thank you all much, all of you. Fantastic to hear about the example from Guatemala. It's really heartening to hear about that, and of course the inspirations of you. So thanks also to NDI and the Population Fund for organizing this. Thanks a lot.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you, Ambassador. So, Stacey, maybe you can help tackle the question on digital technology and education. I think it's a force that we can harness for civic and participation, but recent election conflicts have shined a harsh light on the negative impact for political progress, for education, and for civic participation. So could you just talk about that a little bit? Okay, por favor.
Okay. Solo quería agregar que antes de, en nuestro contexto, yo creo que es muy importante invertir en educación. ¿Por qué? Porque esto nos ayuda a nosotras, a las mujeres, sobre todo a las mujeres más jóvenes, del contexto donde vengo. Las adolescentes empiezan a perder espacios de educación y espacios recreativos. ¿Por qué? Porque empiezan a asumir roles de género que tenemos asignados, entonces esto reduce el tiempo de dedicarse a la educación. Pero no solamente esto, sino que en Guatemala, lamentablemente, en las zonas rurales no hay una escuela secundaria. Se complementa los primeros 6 años de escuela, pero no se garantiza el resto. Entonces, Cuando no se tiene acceso a educación, la educación suele ser más cara, es más inaccesible, y si tienen que movilizarse a otra comunidad cercana, la educación puede volverse insegura. Entonces creo que la educación se tiene que garantizar desde tener la infraestructura adecuada, tener a los docentes de manera adecuada también, que se tenga la cantidad de docentes adecuados, porque en las comunidades también sucede que hay una escuela donde van diferentes grados, pero hay 1 o 2 maestros. Entonces, aquí tampoco se está garantizando la educación como tal y sobre todo el apoyo de la familia, como lo mencionó Stacey, ¿verdad? Si nuestra familia no nos apoya, entonces tampoco tenemos como esta motivación o esta fuerza para poder dedicarnos a estudiar. Y yo creo que estos son como los aspectos más fundamentales que se tienen que garantizar dentro de la educación. Y antes de pasar a la tecnología, ¿verdad? Creo que tiene que existir esto para poder transicionar a una educación tecnológica.
Thank you, Karla. So I would like Stacey to respond, and then I think I'm just going to conclude the panel and go to the next session.
So what she said. I would just augment it by saying that I do think digital technology is important, both as a teaching tool, but also as an economic opportunity. We have to, again, I go back to the idea of teaching not just skills, but let's invest in their future potential. The more girls and young women can control the access of digital technology, the more they understand coding and they understand how they can leverage it, they become more valuable on the market. But the other piece of it is, I live in the state of Georgia, where in 2020, one of the organizations I created, we had to pay for Wi-Fi devices in 150 different communities. This is one of the most advanced nations in the country, and we still don't have access to basic digital technology. And so my nonprofit bought Wi-Fi devices and we started paying for them in 2019. We maintained them in 2020 because of COVID and because children in our communities who had to suddenly learn online would not have been able to learn online because the state government refused to provide access. And so we had Wi-Fi devices at McDonald's and in community centers in 2020, and they are still there because even now, this is the United States, there's still lack of access. Now let's think about developing nations and how difficult this digital conversation is. Part of what my mother, I quote her a lot. She says, meet people where they are, not where you want them to be. And so as we think about investment, it is exactly as Karla said, is where they are a place where there is education? Do they have digital access? But we don't stop there. We then solve for the problem. And I think that's the point you were making, that the question was making. If we know that where they are, digital technology is not possible, that teachers are not available, what investment can we make? How do we meet the needs now instead of hoping that in the next 7 to 20 years, the government will do the right thing? We have to not only be entrepreneurial in our intention, but we have to be innovative in our solutions. And if you want innovative solutions that are localized, you have to invest in the people who are on the ground doing the work right now. And that would be my final point because I haven't made it before today. And so there you go.
Okay, thank you so much, Stacey. Thank you so much, Karla. And thank you to our audience online. We apologize that we can't take other question. We have to shift to the other programming of our conversation. But I just want to conclude to say that what an inspiration, you both, and really have feminists up here talking about investment to meet people where they are, real people on the ground, and let them do the work. They just need the resources. So I just want to invite the audience to celebrate our panelists once more. And I'd like to invite Sandra back to the stage.
I may take the final vote. Thank you very much, all of you. I almost feel bad breaking into the conversation, but we did want to take the opportunity to introduce our own new module that is focused on supporting, well, we are calling it accelerating the pace of change on girls into politics and civic leadership. I spoke earlier on about a long-standing partnership actually with the Population Council to develop this new curriculum, and Cayman, my colleague, will give about 10 minutes on it in a few minutes. But if I'm going to frame what we've been thinking about at NDI, if I start with the bell hooks quotation that has been the inspiration for this session, and as Thoai mentioned earlier, the classroom is the most radical space of opportunity in the academy. And I think we are looking at that issue, that it's about radicalism, it's about possibility and change. And a lot of what we try and do, obviously, in the political space, is to drive those capabilities around empowerment. Empowerment as an expansion of capability to choose. What people have the capacity to choose, they have the ability to change. So we are working very much along the spectrum of capability, choice, and change in the work we do around the world as NDI. I was interested that Minister Sengeh mentioned that his cabinet now has 9 members under 40. In Africa, that is probably a young cabinet. But I have to say, I was in Sri Lanka in 2019, and at that time, the parliament in Sri Lanka had more men over 70 in it than it had women. More men over 70 than it had women. So we are talking very much about a number of different fault lines, right? We're talking about, yes, gender, we're talking about age. We are also talking about broader issues of inclusion, race, LGBTQI, ethnicity, whatever it is. So there are so many of these areas, but we find time and again, that the girl, the young woman, is the least represented of all. And very good point made, not necessarily well represented here either. I would make an excuse, but I'm not going to. But we do want to change that. And one of the things we feel is important is to deepen that pipeline of girls who are ready to become engaged in politics and civic education. Sorry, politics through civic education. So we have designed this module, and I think the really cool thing about it is that we are not trying to run this ourselves. We want those of you who are already engaged in the empowerment and capability raising and engagement with adolescent girls and young women to consider adding this module to the work you're already doing, because we want to embrace the whole girl. If we started running political training camps by itself, it would undermine that very principle. So really, this is for you all. We hope that we will be able to pique your interest in thinking about adding this module to the work you're already doing. It will be available in many languages in a few weeks' time. So having said that, I'm going to ask Cayman to come up and just give about 10 minutes on that. And then we may well just reopen the floor to question and answer. But I have to say, we did just want to take this opportunity of having you all here as a captive audience to hear about the Disruptor module.
Good morning. How is everyone doing? I feel like the theme for today is tough acts to follow. Thoai said it, but he had to go only after the keynote, and I've had to go now after the keynote, the panel, and then the transition remarks. So we'll see how I do. Good morning. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Cayman Pasco. I am a program manager on the Gender, Women, and Democracy team at the National Democratic Institute. I lead our adolescent girls and young women programming and specifically run our Disruptor program. And so I'm going to try and keep it short so we have a chance to have proper questions and hear feedback, because I really do want to hear what your thoughts are and remarks and if there's gaps that we're missing, but I'll provide an initial framing first. So as Sandra indicated, Disruptor for us is supposed to be a module and methodology for training in civic and political leadership for adolescent girls and young women. We're really focused on that political engagement. I'm going to use a Women Deliver tagline, reframing who leads, changing the face of politics, and enabling power shifts with that. But before I talk about what it is, I think we should talk about why we created it and what the goal of it was. Sandra first talked about it a few moments ago, but for us, the goal was to deepen the pool of adolescent girls and young women that not only have the political skills, but they also have the connections, the capacity, and the confidence. And then we're hoping the aspirations to run for a political office or be engaged in the political landscape. And so I guess, how do we make that happen, right? That's the goal. For us, the first step many, many, many years ago was to first understand what the barriers were in the current programming, what gaps existed, to understand how we could actually accomplish that goal. And so for us, we started working with the lovely Population Council and another few organizations to have roundtables. So this was like 2017, 2018 time. And what we learned were a couple of key points that I really want to stress, because the key points I'm going to say are going to be reflected in exactly the reason why we designed it the way that we did. So the first point for us is really that, Sandra said it again earlier, what we learned is that the confidence gap is a really crucial point to be addressed. So we commonly work with women in the political landscape, and our theory of change is that you have to be working at the individual, institutional, and sociocultural levels. But when we're talking about adolescent girls and young women, that isn't enough. We have to be addressing that confidence gap. Girls, as we said, we think reach their peak confidence somewhere between the ages of 7 and 9 years old, which is crazy, right? 7 to 9 years old. And that somewhere by the time of 12, their confidence exponentially decreases. Meanwhile, young boys' confidence only increases, right? So we see a pendulum switch that's taking place. And that's creating a shrinking of voices by the time girls are only 12 years old. And so that's the first key point that I want to flag for us, is the confidence gap piece. The next thing that we learned in our roundtables is that we really have to be creating safe spaces and environments for girls to be learning and for them to have a wider network for themselves. So that is a crucial piece as well, making sure they have a larger social fabric, around them. And then after that, we do have to be helping them have the capacity, the confidence, and connections so that they then can go out and engage in the political spectrum. And so those are some of the key pieces that we learned. Another fact that we found, which was particularly interesting, and maybe some of you can say you in a moment that you felt the same or you have experienced this yourself, is that when we talk about civic education for youth, what does that mean, right? 80 to 90% of youth civic education programs, when we were doing roundtables in 2017, 2018, were catered towards young boys. So we like to talk a lot that the term youth is synonymous or can be synonymous with young boys. And there was nothing really catering to young girls and the diverse and unique experiences that they were having. It was a massive gap there. And then one of the things where we were seeing investment more on adolescent girls and young women is in that larger framing around general leadership, education, economic empowerment. But again, there was no one really working robustly in civic education for adolescent girls and young women. And so we obviously were thinking, okay, our goal here is to deepen the pool of adolescent girls and young women to be engaged in the political landscape, right? We're trying to increase the number of potential young leaders because we know that increasing the political participation of women and young women is good for everyone, right? It creates more resilient democracies. It helps with many facets within a larger society. So now I'll talk about what we did and the 3 core principles of Disruptor, which are based on our key findings. So the first one for us is that focus on building the longer runway. So our programming with Disruptor is focused and targeted towards adolescent girls and young women aged 12 to 18 years old. We like to say, if you wait until political enfranchisement or political maturity, which a lot of places is 18 years old, it's already too late, right? I said a few moments ago, by the age of 12, we're seeing a huge decrease in confidence and interest in engaging in politics. So that's the first part. It's catering towards girls ages 12 to 18 years old. We did pilot this and we did have some partners that used it up to 21, 22 for out of school girls, but in general, our target market is 12 to 18. The next one for us is really this key point around without political rights, all other rights are vulnerable. I'm going to say that again. Without political rights, all other rights are vulnerable. So we can teach a young girl that she has the opportunity and she should be making her own decisions around bodily autonomy, right? Or going to school, or to make decisions around her economic empowerment, or that she should earn the same to her male counterpart. But if young girls don't have the ability and the knowledge and the skill set to be engaging with the political rights, all of those other rights are under threat, right? Of being curtailed, regressed, or removed altogether. So without political rights, all other rights are vulnerable. So this was a key area that we want to make, that we want to stress. So with Disruptor, obviously we've said it 5 times, it's focused on civic and political leadership. I'll give you like a little preview of some of the topics of the modules. We cover things like, what's your issue? What's your why? What are your personal values? How to build a campaign team, how to build a campaign team, how to network. There's ones on voting systems and political voting systems and voting rights, and many others. So we have a total of 15. I should also say in this, we have safety planning, because that's a key point around creating safe spaces in that. So there's a safety planning module as well. And then the last point, the third point that I really want to make, is specifically around the thing that Stacey has really stressed today, which is important to us. It's about really supporting the whole girl. So for us, Disruptor is not meant to be a standalone program. It is meant to be integrated into larger general leadership programming that's already happening with adolescent girls and young women. I think Women Deliver is a great way to be thinking about this framing, because we have so many different organizations multi-sectorally coming together to work on one issue. And I think that's a great way to think about Disruptor, that it is one piece of a larger pie, and we're trying to fill that gap for organizations that maybe don't have the specific technical expertise and the ability to provide that training and help fill that gap. But for us, it's important that it isn't standalone, because we want to support the whole girl. And it's as much about having a young girl be able to manage and navigate through puberty and those awkward middle school years as it is about her feeling comfortable and confident with her political skills and leadership. So those are the 3 key points on that. So for us, Disruptor can be integrated into your general programming. What we've worked to kind of accomplish, and I know you won't be able to see it to provide feedback today, but hopefully when you go live, you'll be able to give us your thoughts. What we've hoped that we've accomplished is a module that is concrete enough to provide anyone that doesn't have experience or background in this space really good, solid modules, activities around civic and political leadership training for girls, but also can be contextualized for the environment, right? I think someone kind of mentioned it earlier. We aren't claiming that we know all about this, that we really want to rely on our implementing partners to assess what are the needs of the girls that you're working with? What is the current capacity of the girls you're working with, and make adjustments for that? What is the political context that you're working in, and then make contextualizations there. So we're hoping that we've created something that's very concrete yet flexible, and allows partners to really set the tone and really do what's best for their group that they're working with. And so I guess I think that's really the large pieces that I want to stress for us. We did pilot this in Kenya and Brazil. I'm happy to talk about that a little bit more. I want to be mindful of time, but I'll just give you like 2 quick statistics about the feedback, and then I'll wrap it up so we can ask questions. So we piloted it in Kenya in 4 different locations and in Brazil in 1 different location. The early returns were incredibly positive for us. We piloted in the fall of 2022 until the early part of 2023. So it's relatively new within that landscape. So in Kenya, 78% of participants stated an increased confidence in their ability to engage in the community civically and politically after going through the Disruptor program. 87 of the participants stated an increased confidence in their ability to engage in the community civically and politically in Brazil. And then together, I thought this statistic was really important because we know networks and connections are a really key part of this. So 91% of participants in Brazil and 93% of participants in Kenya responded that they have a bigger civic and political network after Disruptor. So 91 and 93% saw an increase to their network. So I guess we're so excited about this. As Sandra said, we're hoping that it will go live in August. We have a landing page on our website where if you go onto it, there's a way to request to be notified when it goes live. We will be doing requests. You will have to request access for it due to safeguarding and do no harm pieces. But I'm happy to take questions now if I can help answer any, and looking forward to any feedback you might have. Do we have any questions? Someone, okay, we have one mic up there. Maybe, would you help us with that one? We're gonna steal some from the, right there.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Amanda. I'm a Brazilian owner of a nonprofit, work with gender-based violence prevention inside the schools. First, I'd love to hear where it happened in Brazil. And a challenge that we face is how to evaluate behavior change. What we see from our students is that they say how they increase their participatory abilities and everything, but we struggle to understand how really evaluate how they do it in the daily life and how their values, and especially in Brazil, we're talking about sexism and racism, how we can evaluate how these values changed or not. So I'm not asking for answers, but also sharing something that we have struggling and we have been studying on how to do it. Thank you.
Yes, I can definitely try and quickly answer that. So the first point, it was piloted in Rio de Janeiro, and we worked with an organization called Pepera. And so to the point earlier where this can be contextualized for different environments, we piloted this in a play-based environment, but that doesn't mean that it has to be implemented in a play-based environment. If you wanted to, if you were doing a culinary class with girls on a weekly basis and you wanted to contextualize it to do it that way, you could do it that way. So we worked with Pepera in Rio de Janeiro. I think for us, we are definitely, because pilots have ended and within the last 6 months. So to be able to track long-term social behavioral norms feels a little bit too early to be able to say that. One of the things that I think in general that we should just be thinking about, and a recommendation that our partners had, and I'm sure many of you are already doing this, but just to underscore this, is the critical need to be doing the socialization with the communities as well, right? To be going, so when this was taking place, we went into communities and we first started discussing what was taking place to have that community buy-in so that they could have a wider support system. Because to the point you're saying, it's not only that the girls need to have social and behavioral norm change, right? We have to create that wider network of support so that these things that they've learned, they also do have space to take that on and do that. So that would be something that I recommend as well. And I'll leave it there for now, but we can chat. I'm going to be here afterwards so we can get into a very detailed explanation later if that's helpful. And I want to be mindful of time. So I think maybe we'll start with 2 more questions and then we'll see if we can sneak in a third. Does that sound okay? And I will be here after for any questions that come up. Let's go right here.
Perfecto. Hola, pues nosotras somos una organización en Oaxaca, México, nos llamamos Mano Vuelta y hacemos trabajo con niñas y jóvenes, particularmente también impulsando los derechos políticos o la participación política. Hace rato que platicaban del programa, dijeron algo muy interesante, como que habría que mirar a muchas personas resolviendo un solo problema. Entonces, a mí me gustaría preguntar para ustedes, desde su experiencia, ¿qué tendría que saber o en qué tendría que formarse un docente o una maestra para acompañar el proceso de fortalecer la participación política de niñas y jóvenes? Tomando en cuenta que las maestras o los maestros son quienes están al frente del grupo mucho tiempo, muchos años.
So I think the shorter answer is you should use our disruptor module, because I think that would be a great way to use the resources to really address that piece. We work with Running Start and other organizations on this, and we like to talk about the 3 C's: confidence, capacity, and connections. And so I think that that should always be the grounding piece. But to recap, I think for us, the core principles when you're thinking through programming is to make sure you are addressing that confidence gap, that you are creating safe spaces and a larger ecosystem, and that you really are working to support the whole girl. But the technical nitty-grittiness around like young women's political leadership, I feel like is too much for me to answer in a minute. So again, I'm not trying to punt it, but we can definitely connect offline. But plug, we should use the disruptor module. That's what I think, because we've worked to try and fill that gap so that for your organization who doesn't have that experience, right, that all you have to do is help to contextualize it. We've done the heavy lifting as far as those technical political pieces and civic education pieces. And all you have to do is look at your population and say, what works best for them? And how do I do that? And then we're going to take one over there, and then someone give me a time check. I think this is going to be the last one, and then I will stay after for any questions people have. And I have plenty of business cards if we need to connect after.
All right, thank you. My name is Naomi Kamida. I work for Forum for African Women Educationalists, FAWE, Regional Secretariat. And what you're talking about seems quite similar to some work we do through our Tuseme clubs, which means speak out. And we work in some schools in Kenya. So first, I would like to know the areas you're working in Kenya, and also to know, given the changing political environments, how has that affected the way they're running the clubs? Because different kind of governments come with different kind of expectations and regulations around school club. Thank you.
So in the first question, you were asking specifically around the locations that we piloted in Kenya, and apologies if I butcher the pronunciation, but we did it in Kilifi, Kwale, Mombasa, and Tana River areas, those 4 counties. We worked with 150 girls across those locations. And then, I'm sorry, it was really quiet up here. I think there was a question about navigating things with like governments and different social norms, but can you repeat that? Because I really couldn't hear. I apologize.
So, for instance, in Kenya, we just had the general election last year, and it was a changing political environment. Does that affect the way that the clubs operate in schools? And because, you know, every government comes with different expectations and different regulations around that. So just to understand if that has posed a challenge.
So I think first, to your point, every context is different, right? And so there are that we don't view disruptors like a monolithic one size fits all. And so for Kenya, there were definitely, we recognize, we piloted both of these either during or after general elections in Brazil and Kenya. So it was a really unique time. And at first we were also like, is this going to be like a bad thing? And it was actually the complete opposite, because it was so topically relevant and it just really allowed great synergy. We worked with really great implementing partners who really led on that piece as far as connecting with different stakeholders, those key stakeholders, to make those decisions. So we let them determine the environment that was taking place and have those touch points, because again, there are so many different levels of intricacy that we weren't coming in and saying, this is what you need to do. We were saying, please tell us what you think is best. We can help you navigate that if you need support, but we're going to lean on you to have those conversations because you know best. But they were piloted either during or after elections, and both of them had incredible responses. I am going to transition for Sandra to give closing remarks. I will be here afterwards, but thank you so much. We're really excited. We hope that this helps create radical possibilities for girls. And so we hope you'll join us and use it and be a part of that with us.
Thanks very much, Cayman. Not quite a girl, but certainly a very young person. We wanted to leave some time for you to mix and mingle and just have a bit of a chat. We've run slightly longer than we had planned to do so, but please do take the opportunity. There are refreshments as well. As I've said already, we are excited about the Disruptor program. We know we have to do more on the evaluation piece and the evaluating the norm change piece. But we do think that we want you, and this is an important thing, this is not for NDI to be running these programs. What we want is for you to integrate this work into the work you're already doing and to use the opportunity as best you can. We'll always be there to support that orientation, but ultimately, it's not us that's running the program. We are hopefully working in partnership with you to create these radical possibilities and to create the change and the choices, greater change and greater choices for adolescent girls and young women. Thank you all very, very much for being here. Thanks to our wonderful panelists. Thank you for the questions that have made us think. You know, a luta continua, but victoire est possible.